If you'll stay standing real quick for the reading of the passage, it's kind of been a little bit of a tradition that we've started here at Church on a Mission. And so the passage we're going to be looking at today, we're going to kind of base everything off this one passage. It's found in 3 John, and it's just one chapter, but for sake of reference, it's 3 John chapter 1 and verse 2. It says, "Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health as it goes well with your soul." As it goes well with your soul. And I believe that the Bible far more emphasizes the health on the inside than your health on the outside. You see it all through Jesus' teaching that he is far more concerned with us being changed from the inside than from the outside. Because what happens is when we're changed from just the outside, it doesn't necessarily just change the inside as well. When we just change the outside, it's just behavior modification, and that's just more or less religion. But Jesus came to change our hearts and to change our souls, if you will. And so when we get changed on the inside, it manifests itself naturally to the outside. And so this week is kind of a little bit of a continuation, almost, if you will, of Healthy Heart. We spent the past few weeks on Healthy Heart. Pastor Ryan did a great job on that. And so this is more or less somewhat kind of a bit of a continuation on it. And so we're going to look at one simple question this morning, just one really simple, easy question, but it might take us a little bit of time to kind of digest this question. But the question that we're going to ask this morning, which is my sermon title, is how's your soul? How is your soul? And so while you take your seat, turn to 3 people or 4 people and ask them, how is your soul today? How is your soul today? And if you are a kiddo in the house, you are dismissed on out to Church, Kids on a Mission. They're going to go have a blast in there. Let's give them a round of applause. No lie, guys, I'm kind of jealous of Kids Church. I would love to go there. I'm just saying. So, because they have a lot of fun in there. I hear them screaming and running around and doing stuff and playing games. Kind of like, man, I'm jealous of you guys. Wish I could go in there. But nonetheless, you got me this morning, so... Oh, man. So this morning we are starting a brand new series called Summer at CM. This is our first week of Summer at CM, and I'm really excited about this series because we are going to take the next couple weeks, and we're going to be hearing from various speakers from different parts. And so this week you got me, as you could tell, and next week we're actually bringing in, not Todd, Tori's dad, Todd. We're going to be bringing him in. He's going to be awesome, speaking on Father's Day. And then the next week we got Paul Musso coming in from Healing Place Church. He actually came, I believe, about a year or so ago, and he was a great speaker. I loved him, and he was awesome. And then the last week, we got a really good friend of mine that used to be one of my youth leaders back when I was in high school. His name's Christian Chambliss. He's the Youth Alive director, missionary out in Arizona. And so you guys will most definitely want to be here for that. And so... in case you couldn't tell, Ryan and Leah are not here this morning. They are out on some vacation. I kicked them out for a week, and so they are out, I believe, in Kentucky at a wedding. I believe that's where they're at, and so we send them love. We love them to death, and but this morning, like I said, we're going to look at a very simple question, but it may seem kind of like a little bit of a daunting question, how's your soul? But nonetheless, we'll get through it, I promise. Cool? Sound good? Cool. You guys alive? You well? All right, cool. Yeah, I'll wake you up, I promise. So, anybody in here like fitness? Anybody in here a fan of fitness or health stuff? Anybody? Come on, you can raise your hand. It's okay. You can raise your hand in church. Does that look like? I love that, Rocky. So I try to be fit. It's an endeavor of mine, of course. As you can tell, I'm very, very muscular and very fit. So I try to be fit and I try to be healthy. It does help, though, that my wife, she's from Oregon, and so there's the land of the vegetable, I call it. Because they pretty much just eat vegetables and like milk up there. I'm kidding, they eat more than that, but I make fun of her for being from the land of vegetables. But so my wife, she eats healthy and stuff like that, and so it helps. But I've noticed there's this trend on like Instagram and social media that like a lot of people are becoming like fitness gurus, and they're like these fitness coaches and stuff like that. So they'll literally on their Instagram accounts, they'll literally go to a gym, they'll film themselves doing various workouts to like show you how to work out, and they'll post it on Instagram. Now, I have no problem with that. I think if that's your dream, go for it. I empower you. I think that's awesome. But I do have to admit, I think that's got to be one of the hardest professions in the entire world, assuming you can actually get, big enough to be able to make money off of it. But I'm like, man, that must be such a difficult, occupation. Because, I've noticed just in my 22 years of existence that, fitness and health stuff is so confusing. Anybody else kind of agree? It's just so confusing. You could throw calculus at me, I'm fine. You could throw some chemistry at me, I'm good. Maybe some physics, I'm fine. But fitness stuff, it's so confusing to me. And so I think it was actually, I want to say it was last week, me and Hakeem, we were talking, Hakeem in the back, we were talking, and we were moving a banner, I think downstairs or upstairs, one of the two, and I told him how we were going to the beach, either that week or the next week or something like that, and he was like, yeah, you should, when you work out, don't use weights, because then later on in life, your body gets dependent upon the weights. And so I'm like, it's interesting, is I have heard that before, and to Hakeem's credit, I have heard that, I have read that in articles before, but also I definitely have heard that's the worst possible way to work out, because if you don't use weights, you're not actually going to bulk up. So I'm like, okay, so do I use weights? Do I not? So I'm like, hey, this is really confusing. Also, actually, a couple weeks ago, me and a friend, we were talking, and for some reason, the topic of fiber comes up, just kind of, as it does in conversation typically. And so fiber comes up in conversation. And he's like, yeah, dude, I have this friend who's a doctor, and he's like, yeah, in your diet or in your meals, fiber is supposed to be the biggest portion of your meal, not protein. I'm like, what do you mean? I've grown up my entire life thinking that it's protein. Protein is the big part of your diet that's supposed to be the biggest part, not fiber. And he's like, no, dude, promise you, this doctor friend of mine who's a medical doctor, he's like, protein is not the best part. It's actually fiber. But the best thing, the best reason why fitness and health is super confusing. So about a year or so ago, I used to work at a bank. And what I would do is in the mornings, I would get there to the bank, and I would do my deal and whatnot, and everything would be good, and I would clock in and stuff like that. And what would happen is, nobody in the mornings are like, ooh, let's go deposit checks and stuff like that. So the mornings are usually really slow. And so what I would do is I would get on my computer, I would do my thing and whatnot, and I would go to the news, just to kind of see what's going on in the world, who did what, and who, who's doing what and whatnot in the world. And so I scroll down to the health section, and here's this article about butter, okay? And basically this article is butter's super good for you. It's got all these really nice fats and whatnot, all this stuff in it. And so I'm like, okay, that's cool. Maybe I should start putting butter in more stuff, put in popcorn and on bread and stuff like that. And maybe I should put butter in my coffee, or put butter in various things. And so I leave that day going okay, maybe butter's actually really good for you. Now, people, when I tell you that the next day, this must have been a Wednesday that I saw this first article, and then that next day, I come to work, clock in, do my whole deal. I get to the health section, and wouldn't you know it, wouldn't you believe it, there's another article about butter from the same publishing company that instead of this time being butter's awesome, it's butter is like Satan, it's going to destroy families, and might as well eat cement. And I'm like, are you kidding me, people? The exact same publishing company that the previous day, they're oh, butter's great for you. But then the next day, by the same company, they're yeah, butter's terrible. Don't ever eat it. Just eat cement if you're going to think about butter. I'm like, man, and it dawned on me that if we're this confused and this confused about how to be healthy on the outside, how much more confused are we about how to be healthy on the inside? If we can physically, tangibly measure out fat content, sugars, carbohydrates, that sort of stuff, we can physically measure that stuff out on the outside, how much more difficult and confusing is it to be healthy on the inside? And so as we're looking at this question, how's your soul? Well, I don't know, good, I guess. So when we hear this question, maybe we're either on one boat of I have no idea how to even start to answer that question, don't even know what that question means, or we're in the other boat of again, how do you answer that question? Do you say good? Do you say well? Do you say how do you even answer this question? So we're going to hopefully do a little bit of justice in answering this question this morning of how is your soul? How's your soul? And so this takes us to the Genesis story, to the very beginning of time when God is creating everything and God is creating all of humanity and the world and everything like that. And so in Genesis chapter 2, what we see is God is now creating everything. So God, he has created the planet, he's created the heavens, the earth, the squirrels and giraffes and whales and rivers and mountains and all that stuff. So God has created everything. And then he comes to the creation of man. And if you'll notice in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, he says, "Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature." So if you'll notice here, before God breathes into Adam, Adam is just a corpse. He is just an entity. He is just a physical human body. That's all he is. But it's not until God breathes into Adam that he becomes a living being. That is the origin of the soul. That when God finally breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, then Adam became a human being. Then he became Adam. And so what's interesting is right after God breathes into Adam, he puts him into an environment. And if you know, I'm sure you're probably aware of this, but the environment that you put yourself in can either positively or negatively affect your soul. The environment that you put yourself in willingly can it positively or it can negatively affect your soul. And so what we're going to look at is we're actually going to look at 4 different environments or 4 different elements to a healthy soul. And so we're actually going to look through this Genesis account and look through the different environments that are a part of this original environment. And this is honestly a big reason why, as a church, like every single Tuesday, the staff, we get together and we'll kind of discuss the Sunday. We'll discuss what's going on because we understand the importance of the environment that we're setting here. It's important for your soul. It's important for you on the inside. We're not doing all this stuff, excuse me. Oh man, the thing I hate the most about speaking is I always have this little bit well up inside me. It's almost like a burp, and I hate that so much. And I'm always it's like my biggest fear, and it always happens every time. But I'm gonna get through it. So, in case you're wondering, what is that guy doing? But it's interesting that in this environment, so every Tuesday, staff get together and we'll create and we do our best to create and facilitate an environment in here that can help our soul thrive. And so we're going to look at the original environment in which the soul thrived, that God and humanity thrived together. So the first environment for the soul is found in Genesis chapter 2, verses 9. It says, "And out of the ground the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food." The very first description that we ever get of the Garden of Eden was that the trees looked cool and the food tasted great. Can I get an amen here? The food tasted great. The very first description that we get of the original environment for the soul was that the trees looked good and the food tasted great. So we're asking this question of okay, well, how is your soul? Well, another question we could ask is, how are you resting? So the first environment is rest or enjoyment. How are you resting? And so this actually kind of reminds me of a very paramount teaching of Jesus, actually found in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 and 29. It says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your soul." You will find rest for your soul. I don't know about you, but have you ever gotten a great night's sleep, like an amazing night's sleep, but still on the inside you still kind of feel exhausted, you still feel exasperated, you got a great night's sleep, but your soul still feels a little heavy, your soul still feels exasperated and exhausted? And this is why I think a big reason why the Sabbath is so important. The Sabbath, in case you've never heard of the Sabbath before, the Sabbath is you'll work for 6 days, but then on the 7th day you rest. And God, in the creation of all creation, God took a Sabbath day. He made everything in 6 days, and on the 7th day, he rested. And within rest, there is this profound sense of trust. There is a profound sense of trust in resting, and it's also a profound sense of God is first in my life. That while I rest, I'm saying, hey, God is first in my life, and a restless soul is a soul that thinks it is in charge. A restless soul is a soul that thinks it's commander-in-chief, that it is the one in charge, it's the one captain of the ship, it's the pilot of its own life. A restless soul is one that believes it is in charge. But in reality, God is primary, and really you can kind of put it down to this, is that a soul that trusts well is a soul that rests well. That if you can trust in God, then you can rest. That there is a sense of rest that when we can trust in God. And I think one of the most spiritual things you could probably do maybe this week while we're kind of thinking about it, still fresh on the mind, is one of the most spiritual things you could do is go and have a good meal with some good friends, talk about life, and talk about God. Just go and have a good meal with some friends, talk about life, and talk about God. And it was cool because actually over Memorial Day weekend, me and my wife, the Kellers, and Tori, we all went to Pensacola Beach, and it was super fun. We all got fried and turned into basically human crawfish because we were so burnt. More so Tori, but she's better now. She's all good. And so we went to Pensacola, and we went to this place called Crabs, which, by the way, if you ever go to Pensacola, go to this place called Crabs. They got some amazing crab. And so we went there, and we had this meal, and I think me and my wife, we got like some fish and chips or something like that, which is, I guess that's more of an English phrase. But anyways, and we also got some crab. Ryan was like, oh man, we got to get some crab. So we got some, and while we're eating it and everything, I'm actually crunching the legs and stuff like that, so I did crab the right way. And I noticed while we were eating, because I still kind of knew a little bit about what I was going to preach on, what I was going to talk about and stuff like that. I was just kind of more or less forming everything at that point. And I left the restaurant thinking man, this is exactly what God talked about. This is exactly what God meant when he said, hey, rest and just have good meals with good friends, talk about life and talk about God. We didn't talk about church logistics or anything like that. We just simply had fun. We laughed a lot. Ryan threw a piece of crab on the ground and searched for it like it was $1 million, which was really funny. And so, but I left there thinking man, this is exactly what God means. Because afterwards, I know it sounds weird, but I could feel that my soul was just better. I could just feel that on the inside, I was just a little bit better because I had a great meal with some good friends talking about life and talking about God. And maybe another really spiritual thing you could do this weekend, which, of course, memorizing the book of Philippians would be really spiritual, and that would be a great thing. I would encourage you to do that if you have the time and stuff. But maybe something even just as spiritual is maybe go for a walk. As seemingly simple and as mundane as just go for a walk. Maybe go out to Lake Pontchartrain, which I believe is that way. Go out to Lake Pontchartrain, take you and your spouse or a good friend, or even just by yourself, and go out and take a walk. And just admire the trees, admire the birds, admire the clouds, the skies, and all that stuff. And maybe, just maybe, leave your phone at home. I know, what a challenge, right? What did you learn today? Leave my phone at home. Maybe, just maybe, even just leave your phone at home, because I know it'll feel like, the world's going to cave in, and everything's just going to blow up and go to crap and all that stuff. But I promise you go take a walk, just enjoy everything. You'll come back and you will find that the world has not caved in. The world is still spinning just because you left your phone for 10 minutes. I know some of us in here are no can do, but that's okay. But maybe just go for a walk and just admire. I know we don't have mountains or really super cool scenery around here, but maybe just go for a walk and admire the trees. Or even, hey, go out to the West Bank, somewhere the more rural areas, or even out by Laplace or something like that. Just go and look at what's going on, look at the trees, look at the birds and stuff like that. Because God created all this stuff, as you see, it was pleasant to the sight. That God created the trees and the birds and the giraffes and all this stuff for our enjoyment, and it's a theater for God's glory. It's a theater to showcase God's creativity and his genius. And so in your life, are you making margin? Are you creating margin for rest? Are you scheduling time for rest? Namely, with the Sabbath day, are you working for your 6 days? And are you taking that 7th day of rest? So the second environment for the soul, we find it in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. It says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden to work it and to keep it. To work it and to keep it. So the second environment for the soul is responsibility or job. Responsibility or job. And I've heard plenty of times from whether it be students in my life or just whoever I'm talking to, they're like, man, I cannot wait for heaven, because heaven means no more work, just going to go to the beach, sit on a hammock, and nap all day long. Heaven's going to be no work, none of that stuff. I'm so pumped for heaven. And it's well, did you know that the very first gardener position, the very first landscaping position posted on the cosmicindeed.com was actually given to Adam? Adam had a job. Adam had responsibility. And no, in this context, jobs are not exhaustive, and they are not the super laborious thing that God gives us to punish humanity, going, take a job, son, let's go. This is not this exhaustive, crazy thing that God gives us. In fact, job is not a curse. A job is not a curse. In fact, a job is a blessing. A job is a blessing. And in fact, Paul even talks a little bit about your work that you do. He says, whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord, not for men. Work heartily. And actually, Ecclesiastes puts it this way of do it with all of your might. When you work on something, do it with all of your might. So your job, you may think and you may feel like your job is super insignificant. There's nothing important about it. And, we could debate, of course, all day long about what jobs are super important, what aren't, and whatnot. But that's besides the point. But really, whether or not you believe or think your job is important, it is important for your soul. Your job is important for your soul. Having responsibility, having that is important for your soul. I don't know about you, but you ever been like in summer, like whenever some of you were in school, and like the first couple weeks of summer were like, oh man, this is so cool. Get to sleep in, get to stay up late all the time, get to do whatever I want. And then like 4 weeks into it, you're like, okay, played 14 hours of video games yesterday. And I ate some pizza, now what? It's kind of like it eventually kind of gets a little bit boring. And if there's no responsibility in your life, your soul kind of tends to deteriorate a little bit. And so a job is, in fact, good for the soul. In fact, what's even cool about this passage is when it says, in Genesis, it says, God put Adam in the garden to work it and keep it. And this word work, actually in the Greek, it can mean both work and to serve. To work or to serve. And so the question of, well, how is your soul? Well, are you resting well, but are you serving well? Are you serving well? And I mean, I think for the longest time, for me, I always thought serving was this idea of this super selfless act that we did in the legacy of Jesus because he kind of told us to do. And so we serve people because it's this really selfless act for other people. And of course, that is completely true, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I find in my own life, I've realized that serving is actually a lot more for the servant than it is for the person that you're serving. It benefits you more than it actually benefits the person you're serving, which does sound a little prideful and a little bit like egotistical, just a little bit. But hear me out, that when it comes to your soul, I mean, you got to do what's good for your soul. And serving is one of those things that keeps your soul healthy. Serving is, in fact, good for your soul. In fact, I grew up in church, and I've like just about literally grown up in church. And I remember I was in 6th grade when I got my first drum set. I think about 7th or 8th grade, I started playing drums at the church I was at in Missouri. And it was really fun because I got there at like 7 in the morning, played drums for like 2 services and stuff like that. And, excuse me. There it is again. I hate that so much. And I would play drums and whatnot. And actually, one specific instance was we were at a women's conference actually in college, and it was like downtown Springfield, so it was about a 30-minute drive or so away from where I was at. And I remember I had to be at the arena at 6 in the morning, people. I had to be at the arena at 6 in the morning. And I'm like, that's early, but that's cool. I'm fine with that. And I had to pick someone else up too, so I had to wake up and leave even earlier that. And so, but I remember though, throughout the rest of that day, it was so energizing because the entire day I was serving people. I was doing things for people. It was a women's conference, so I was serving women all day. And it was really fun, but I realized in that it really energized me, that there's something about serving. It goes down even to the deepest parts of your souls. And what can happen though with serving is, especially like in an instance for me where I've served for a little while and then I grow up, what can happen is appointments start to happen, getting groceries start to happen, minivans, marriage, in our case eventually kids will happen, and appointments and paying bills and all this stuff like that can happen. And so eventually what can happen is your schedule starts to fill up and swell up a little bit, and then what you'll find is that serving kind of slides just a little bit down the priority list just a little bit at a time. And so if we're not careful and we're not intentional about it, serving can become just another thing that we can do when we get around to it. And so, and for me, it's even a little bit difficult sometimes when people are serving, especially here, because I'm like, man, I almost feel bad sometimes when people serve, because it's like they're, they're serving here instead of maybe taking a shift at work or something like that, or they're giving up a shift when they know they need to be saving up for like a vacation to go to the Bahamas or something like that, or maybe they just got off work and they haven't rested in forever, or maybe this is the only day that they have to sleep in. It's like, I feel bad for you, but at the same time, I understand and I know that serving is good for the soul. It is good to serve. It is good for your soul. And lastly, with this point, Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, it says, even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And in fact, this idea of serving is very paramount throughout Scripture, that Jesus modeled this, that we are to serve people and not to be served. So the third environment for the soul, It's found in Genesis chapter 2, verse 16 and 17. It says, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that day that you eat it, you shall surely die." Which is very encouraging, right? So this third environment for the soul is restriction. This third environment for the soul is restriction. And I've always wondered, because again, I've grown up in church, and so I've always wondered, like, why would God even put the tree there in the first place? You know, like, why would God give the opportunity for us to sin and do wrong? You know what I mean? Like, if God just didn't put the tree in there, we'd be good. We'd be in the clear. Nothing would be wrong. We would all be good. It'd be great. And before we really jump into that too much, I want to take a step back, and I want to make an observation real quick, is that in this situation, the odds are stacked in our favor. The odds are stacked in our favor. Actually, if you go to the verse where I got a few underlines up there in Genesis. Yeah, so Genesis 2:16, it says, "You may surely eat of every tree in the garden, every single tree, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat." So you may eat of every tree. Like, think about it. How many trees maybe were in the garden? Hundreds of trees, thousands of trees, who knows? So we'll do a little bit of audible exercise if you don't mind. So God brings Adam into the garden. He's like, all right, you may eat of that tree, and yes, 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 yes. That little tree right there, yes too, yes, yes, no. But God, why? I want that tree. It's almost like we're so fixated on that one tree. Like, God, why? It's not fair. I want that tree. Like, that's the tree I want. Not all these ones, because you told me I could. I want that one, because you told me I couldn't, right? So we get so fixated on the one tree that we're like, well, but God, you don't love me. You hate me now because you gave me the tree that I couldn't eat, right? But what's interesting about this tree and what's so important about it is, while yes, God introduced the tree, no doubt, because of his grace and love and all that stuff and whatnot, but I think the primary reason why God introduces this tree is because with the introduction of this tree is the introduction of choice. And love, the definition of love that God has decided and described in this universe is that love requires choice. Love has to have choice. Love is not love if it is forced. And so God intentionally puts this tree in here because he knows that we need choice. We need a no in our life. We need a no. You could even call it the necessary no. That's what you could call it, a necessary no. And I think about it like this. I wonder how many times Adam, he's in the garden and he walks past the tree, he's like, no, not today. Or walks past it again, he's like, ooh, you tree, you look good, but no. Walks it past it maybe another day, he's like, man, that tree looks good, but no. He keeps going. Like, think about it. Like, how many times would Adam have walked past that tree and he'd be like, not today. Nope, not going to do it. Not going to do it. Not today. Not today, Satan. You know? I don't know, you guys know that song, right? Not today, Satan. Anyways, okay, cool. All right, just making sure. That joke flopped. But anyways, and so, of course, in Adam's situation in here, there is this obvious distinction between if Adam, if he goes for the fruit, that's obviously sin. In that case, is sin. And if he doesn't, obviously, it's not sin. But Paul even actually alludes to this exact same concept in 1 Corinthians. He says, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. And what Paul's alluding to here is saying no to things that you very well could say yes to, but you say no for the restriction of your soul. It's not sin, of course, to watch an extra hour of TV, but maybe for some of us we could go, okay, well, maybe I could watch an extra hour of TV, but no. Or maybe I will buy some more dessert, or maybe even another dessert, but no. Or maybe I could buy that t-shirt and I could buy those clothes, but no. Or maybe I could stay up until like 4 a.m. playing Fortnite, but no. Right? And so our soul, it needs a no. Our soul needs a no. When was the last time you said no to something just because you could? Just because you had the ability to say no to it? I think sometimes it's good for us to have that no in our life. And yes, it's good for boundaries, for relational boundaries, and even for professional boundaries, but it's good that our soul needs a no. Our soul does need a no every so often. And what's cool about it is God is involved even in those no's. In fact, sometimes what you'll find in life is God will kind of lead you and nudge you a little bit to say, hey, maybe you should say no to that for a little while. Not because it's sinful or it's doing anything necessarily like overly drastic and terrible in your life, but because it's just, hey, maybe you should give that a little no for a while. Maybe it could be social media. It could be TV. It could be video games. Whatever the case may be. Could be anything. But God eventually, at some points, he nudges us to say no to certain things. And what I found in my own experience and experience from other pastors that I've talked to is that you will never regret following in with that no. If you accept that and go, hey, God, you're leading me and you're nudging me to say no to this, so, sure, I'm going to do it. Even though I may really want to buy that shirt, and maybe I really want to watch more TV, and maybe I really want to be on social media more, but maybe God's saying, hey, maybe no. Maybe that should be a no for a little while, and you'll never regret following into that. So how's your soul? Well, I don't know. Well, maybe here's a few things that we can look at. Well, how are you resting? How are you serving? And how are you saying no to things? So the fourth environment for the soul, this fourth environment, is relationships. Relationships. This fourth environment for the soul is relationship. And I don't know, this may come as a little bit of surprise for you, but so far in the gospel narrative, up to this point in Genesis, we see that God created this and it was good. God made this and it was good. God said this and it was good. God made this and it was good. So everything up to this point was good. Did you know that the very first not good in the Bible, the first not good was that Adam was alone? Adam was alone. And you see this in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18. It says, then the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. So at this point, Adam's got a whole lot of pets. He's got lots of squirrels and giraffes and hippos and whales. He's got all sorts of pets, but he has no one to be his best friend. He has no one to be his best friend at this point in his life. And so what God does is God designs the best friend, the first best friend for Adam. God designs the first best friend. And so I think it's really cool that God deliberately, intentionally comes into the situation. He intentionally designs the first best friend. And I know you may be thinking like, well, wasn't Eve Adam's wife? And yes, they were married and they were in romantic relationships. And again, I tread very lightly in marriage advice. I've only been married for 2 years. But what I have learned is that the basis of marriage is friendship. The basis for a good marriage is friendship. It's very difficult to be married to someone you aren't even friends with, right? And so the basis of marriage is friendship. And so that is why I think a big part of why God creates the very first friend for Adam. And he is so intimately and deliberately involved in it. And so a question maybe you could ask is, are you intentional about the friendships in your life? Are you intentional about making key friendships in your life? I think often we can just kind of take friends as they come, like, oh, well, they're my coworkers, so I must just be nice to them. I've got to be okay with them, that sort of thing. Or maybe I go to school with them, so I got to be nice to them. Or maybe, maybe they go to the same church as me, so I've got to be friends with them. And I do absolutely believe in drawing big social circles. I believe in that. I believe in being nice and courteous and nice and courteous to everybody that you meet. I do believe in that, but are you intentional about making key friendships? Because you can have all the friends in the world, but only a select few can be your best friend. Only a few can be your close friend. Only a few can be your intimate friend. And so are you intentional about the friends in your life? Because, much to like a little bit of, poking to one of my own sermons I've preached is, the friends in your life, it's incredibly important who you choose to be friends with in your life because they can direct you down different paths and stuff. And so it's good for your soul to have good friendships in your life. It is good for your soul to have those close friendships. And so we're asking this question of, okay, well, how's your soul? Well, I don't know. I guess it's good. I don't know. But hopefully these 4 key little areas, these 4 elements, these 4 environments, hopefully they kind of help you frame a little bit better of this question of, okay, how is your soul? Well, are you resting well? Are you serving well? Are you saying no? And are you investing in key relationships? Are you doing these few things? Because these are the original environment for the soul that the soul's thrived in within relationship with God. Now, what's interesting to note, though, about this is there's one key detail I left out intentionally. Because on their own, these 4 environments by themselves, they all are powerless, they all fall flat on their face, and they all are more or less meaningless and just have nice concepts without one very important key detail. And that one important key detail is that they involved right connection and right relationship with God. That was the key in this. Because you can be far from God and you can rest all you want. You can have the most responsibility in the world. You can have amazing friends. You can do all these things. But what makes the soul thrive is when it does these things within a relationship with God. And so you may ask, well, what happened? Why are our souls so caught up in this chaotic down spiral? And it's because of the introduction of sin. That because we sinned, then all of a sudden our soul jumps into this downward spiral of chaos. And so sin is in fact the culprit in this situation. Sin is the reason why. And there is only one person that has conquered sin. His name is Jesus. He is the only one that has conquered sin. And so for us to be able to conquer that sin, we need Jesus. We need to have a relationship with God. And so